And sometimes we make dangerously bad decisions like pandemic lockdowns and keeping our own children home from schools when a virus was hurting them far less often than adults. You know, we didn't actually close schools in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic. We didn't even have penicillin back then. We did sacrifice, we suffered, but then we pressed on. Our enemies hate us for surviving, but they would love to be like us.
That was Fox News anchor Harris Faulkner. And, well, it's tough to know where to start with her mess of lies about school closures and public health. Faulkner's imagined history was so wrong it even earned a fact check from Elon Musk's Twitter, where you can say pretty much anything. And that fact check reminds readers that yes, we actually did close schools during the 1918 flu pandemic. Faulkner also proudly remembers that the tough Americans of the 19-teens fought off the Spanish flu without the help of penicillin. And it might surprise you to know that we fought off COVID without penicillin too, because the flu and COVID are viruses. Penicillin only works on bacteria. Now, you may be wondering why Fox News is suddenly talking about COVID school lockdowns long after America's schools have reopened. Republicans are using the memory of those lockdowns to blame schools for something else, an alleged massive increase in trans-identifying kids.
But another thing I'd like to point out that we haven't really talked about here is the gigantic impact on mental health of our kids while they were being forced to stay home, many of them alone by themselves, sitting in front of a screen for most of their waking hours as they were trying to educate themselves with online learning, which was a failure for many. And since this time, these school closures, we've seen a dramatic increase in trans-identifying children, which is something that was not normal nor common many years before this. And I think that's completely devastating.
That's right. COVID didn't just turn your DNA into a radio receiver for Bill Gates. It's also turning your kids trans. At least that's what Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks. And believe me, she'd know a thing or two about sitting in front of a computer all day. And this isn't even the first time Greene has melted down about all this. Here she is back in April, tearing into American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten for daring to try and protect students from a pandemic.
What I'd like to talk about is your recommendations to the CDC as not a medical doctor, not a biological mother, and really not a teacher either. So what you did is you advised the CDC.
Mr. Chairman, that's a
excuse me, this is my time. You advised the CDC to have schools provide remote work, options for staff that have documented high-risk conditions who are increased risk for severe illness from COVID-19 to limit the risk of workplace exposure.
You know who else took advantage of remote work during the pandemic? None other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, who cast proxy votes along with every other member of the House and seemed just fine handling all of her committee work from her living room. Unfortunately for Greene and the GOP, her numbers don't actually add up. Back in March of 2021, Joe Biden passed the American Rescue Plan. That bill gave $122 billion to states to keep schools open, and it's credited with preventing even longer school closures. Survey data also shows that not only did Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan help schools, it disproportionately helped schools in red states. That's because those states' Republican leaders refused school district requests for more money. So, in the end, it was the libs who kept Georgia schools' lights on. And if you thought this mess was confined to Capitol Hill, well, that was wishful thinking, because in Florida, Ron DeSantis has decided to give the GOP's war on schools a big boost by adding it to his latest campaign speech.
We are going to usher in a reckoning about the federal government's disastrous COVID-19 policies. The lockdowns, the school closures, the restrictions, the vax mandates, the whole shebang. We're going to bring about accountability for the people that perpetrated those bad policies, because we have to make sure that it can never happen again in these United States.
To be clear, Ron DeSantis is talking about punishing teachers for trying to protect their own students. It's no surprise that DeSantis jumped from COVID school closures to bashing teachers' unions. In Republican minds, those are two sides of the same problem. Republicans aren't done litigating COVID-19, but the American appetite for talking about the pandemic is already fading. Now the GOP is at risk of selling voters a message they aren't aren't interested in buying, while sounding like idiots in the process. And folks, there is so much more news to cover, so get comfy and click over to this video about a MAGA pastor with some insane beliefs. And as always, leave a comment below so you can let me know what I should cover next.